All right. Good morning, everybody. Got some people rolling in. Really glad to have you all here today. Um, so welcome to the Hyperspace Challenge uh, webinar series. We are getting started here on our international webinar. So everything that you'll need to know as an international company if you want to do business with the U.S. government. So we've got some great guests here to help us walk through some of those opportunities, some of those challenges. My name is Kelly Stafford. I am the Senior Program Manager for Hyperspace Challenge. And I'm really glad to be also introducing Randy Trask, who is from New Mexico International Trade Alliance. He'll be taking over here in just a second as the moderator. But this is this webinar series is an ongoing series hosted by the Hyperspace Challenge Air Force Research Lab and the U.S. Space Force to strengthen the connective tissue between diverse communities in the space industry. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to YouTube. So that you can get up to date on all of our webinars. You get information about those. Also, let us know who you are, where you're from. Put a little note in the chat and say hi. We'd like to know who's here on the call with us. It's always great to hear where you're from and to hear from you. So please do that now or whenever. If you have questions throughout the program, please feel free to put them in the Q&A down at the bottom. There's a little Q&A button down at the bottom. So that's where, if you have a question, that's where we'll see it. If you put it in the chat, we might not see it or it might not get transferred over. So please make sure that you put it in the Q&A. Also, one of the other things I wanted to say, if you put your name in the chat, I will choose one of you randomly and I will give you a little shout out on LinkedIn. So please do that for us. And now, without further ado, I'm going to transfer it over to Randy Trask. Thank you all for joining us. Really glad to have you here today.
Thanks, Kelly, so much. Welcome, everybody. I want to thank Hyperspace Challenge for hosting this. This is a very important topic. It's a topic that's been growing exponentially over the last couple of years, especially as the government has recognized all of the amazing innovation that's coming from space companies outside of the U.S. And there's a bit of a culture shift in how to have the Department of Defense engage with international companies. And you can imagine the effort that goes into pivoting and re-steering that ship to be open to those types of arrangements. But we have some pioneers on this call that I'm thrilled are going to be able to share their programs and different pathways that international companies can consider when looking at the U.S. market, and the Department of Defense in particular. My background, I am, as Kelly said, with the New Mexico Trade Alliance, and we're a very interesting organization in that we have two hats. One hat is our export assistance program. So we actually contract on behalf of local and state government in the state of New Mexico to support both foreign direct investment into the state as well as to help our companies export. But we also have a contract with the U.S. Air Force to support space companies. And because of our international background, we actually will also work with foreign space companies. So in addition to behind both Kelly and I, Hyperspace works out of Q Station. We're thrilled to have him here. But aside from this co-working tech collaboration space that we have here, we incubate space technology companies. We do 5 a year. And we do accept international companies. And those international companies that we work with benefit from an additional soft landing component where our partners, and actually Jack Shelton, who you'll hear from here in a second, is one of our partners, are able to work with those companies directly to help them establish a presence in the United States. So if we have some things we'll add to the conversation about our programming or hyperspaces, we will. But we want to get to why everyone's here and our main speakers. And for that, I'd like to do a little round robin of introductions of our speakers introduce themselves, beginning with Major Jake Singleton from the U.S. Space Force.
Thanks, Randy. I'm excited to be joining the panel today and connecting with I recognize it's probably some really exciting companies from around the U.S. and the world. Again, I am from the United States Space Force, was in the Air Force before and did acquisitions, technology development for space. So it made sense to move over when the Space Force was created. It is a individual and dedicated service that is responsible for space capabilities and operations for U.S. And I specifically work within Space Systems Command, which is responsible for all the capability development and delivery for any technology that the Space Force is going to use for that mission. My background's in astronautical engineering and currently specifically working on space domain awareness technologies. I'm particularly interested in kind of the nexus of commercial and international. So Randy mentioned, how we're kind of trying to shift the great boat here to kind of look at different strategies and markets. And we recognize that in recent years, a lot of the emerging commercial space technology has been coming not only out of the market, but a global marketplace. So from companies all around the world. And I'll just start with that introduction and just highlighting that our leadership get it, they see it. And there are some really exciting changes and initiatives coming through to make it easier for companies wherever you sit to work with the U.S. Space Force. Thanks.
Before we started the webinar, we were chit-chatting a little bit, and I was mentioning how Major Singleton has been one of the pioneers in a lot of these programs, and not to get him in trouble, but have even heard he's gone rogue on a couple of occasions, getting some of these things off the ground, which people were questioning and then have embraced. So a lot of this conversation is happening thanks to him in particular for the work that he's done carving this path out. So thank you, Jake. Next, if we can have Major David Ryan do an introduction, who is with DIU, which is one of the more well-known innovation arms that companies enjoy working with, and provides more of the opportunities for direct tech engagement, particularly with startup tech companies. Major.
Yeah. Thanks, Randy. Yes, my name's Major David Ryan. I go by Merlin. I'm in the Space Force as well. I was in the Air Force as well prior to joining DIU, and I was at SSC. My background's in computer engineering and artificial intelligence prior to going into the space community. And at DIU, we are primarily focused on working with commercial tech and commercial companies. DIU is a joint organization. All that means is that we have Marines, Navy, Army, Coast Guard, Air Force, and Space Force all working side by side. Within DIU, we are not solely focused on space companies. We have 6 portfolios in total, including AI/ML, autonomy, cyber, energy, human systems, and then the one that I work in the space portfolio. And then within the space portfolio, we've identified technologies that the commercial sector is advancing more rapidly than maybe the government would be solely, or commercial technologies that are maybe ready to be adopted by the government at a more affordable cost if they're at that. And so we look at a few different sectors: digital infrastructure, persistent sensing, SAML, and responsive launch. Those tend to be the biggest ones that we look at. And then in order to work with DIU, we have a process of competing for programs that I'll go into further detail, and I really look forward to sharing that. But we do have contracts open with a number of different countries, as well as 48 of the 50 states in the US, and I'll provide more on that as we get to it. Thanks, Randy.
Excellent, thank you. And last but certainly not least, a good friend of mine, Jack Shelton. As we've worked with companies over the years, particularly international companies, it's easy to get excited about opportunities, but when the rubber hits the road, there are obstacles and there are challenges, and there is a correct way and an incorrect way to go about trying to do so. And that's why folks like Jack are extremely important. He's got an amazing boutique law firm that I'm sure he'll mention. And as I mentioned earlier, we really enjoyed a partnership with them, and I think many of the companies possibly on this call maybe already have a relationship with them. So, Jack, take it away.
Thanks, Randy. So yeah, I'm Jack Shelton. I started a law firm with my co-founder called Aegis Space Law, and we focus entirely on the space industry. Our major things that we focus on are export controls, government contracting, spectrum management, FCC licensing, NOAA licensing, and FAA licensing. And of course, commercial contracts in the space industry, as well as, corporate governance, helping you establish your company and structure it the right way, that sort of stuff. But our big focuses, of course, are going to be on export controls, government contracting, and FCC, which are the really hard things. So we work with a lot of US companies, but also quite a lot of foreign companies. It's fairly evenly split, actually, between US companies and foreign companies. And a lot of the foreign companies we work with have come to the US to work with the US government, particularly in CBER and CITR arrangements. So that is all to say this is all possible, and there are clear pathways to getting it done. So excited to talk to you guys.
And just to brag on Jack a little bit more, what I love about Aegis is that they were founded with an eye on supporting startups in particular, acknowledging the fact that some of the larger, more well-established law firms' pricing is just totally out of range. And so that commitment that they've made to support those in the earlier stages is honorable and has been a tremendous help to what we're trying to do for the space ecosystem in this country in general. So thanks again, Jack. With that, let's go ahead and move into our conversation. And I thought a good way to begin, we kind of teased a little bit about this re-steering of this giant boat that we call the Department of Defense, and the fact that there are a lot more opportunities for international companies than there were previously. I was hoping, and this question's for all three of you, how have things changed? What's happening right now? Why is this an opportunity? Why is this an opportune time for this conversation? Anyone can feel free to start.
Yeah. I think that part of it is the collaboration between all of the different government organizations at a much higher level. But the reason why it's right now for a number of the organizations that we represent is due to the fact that we have commercial R&D going into and supporting a plethora of programs that are going to advance technologies that one single organization, the DoD being that organization, would be unable to support and advance the needle into the technological realm that we otherwise would want to. There's so much brain power domestically and internationally that now is the time to continue to work with these companies to ensure that we are collaborating and working together for a bright future within space, because space is a complete international domain. We all want to work together to ensure that we are making the best of that opportunity.
Yeah, I can follow up to that one. I think there has been a couple trends that have been really important in seeing those shifts. One has been the shift on U.S. defense from pulling technology just out of our labs, or maybe out of some of the big defense primes, and more on the commercial market. And then we've seen that shift go to really exploiting a lot of the exciting stuff happening specifically in the space market. And then that has naturally brought us into an international community and market there. Back in 2015, our Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, for the first time in like 50 years, visited Silicon Valley because of everything that was happening there. Following that, the next year, our NDAA, which is where a lot of our law around acquisitions came out, and a couple of things that were significant there. We saw the permanent authority given for the DoD to use things called other transactions, which you'll learn a little bit more from DIU. This is exciting because it not only makes it easier for less traditional companies who've never worked with defense to work with us, but it also doesn't have any restrictions in statute from foreign or non-U.S. companies there. We also saw authority introduced for new pathways to accelerate the way we do acquisitions for organizations like myself that are trying to reach the technology. We saw the formation of DIU and other organizations following, like AFWorks, then SpaceWorks, all these teams really excited about working with, commercial companies. But during that timeline, we've also seen new initiatives like pitch days, which we've done international pitch days, and we've done a cooperative development with foreign partners that have worked directly with non-US companies. So there have been a number of things, but I would say one of the biggest things in there is we also have inside of the US the formation of the United States Space Force as our sixth service. And right now, over the last 2-3 years, we have been building exactly what a defense service in the 21st century might look like. And our current chief of space operations has challenged us to look at absolutely everything that we do and to purpose build that to be relevant in today's not only operational domain, but market. And so we are sitting down and we are thinking about how does it need to look and what does it look like? And part of that discussion has been we need to be able to reach this emerging commercial market outside of the US. And from all levels of leadership, all the way up to our 4-stars, they're nodding their head and they're saying, yes, let's build the strategies and policies that give the pathways and the tools for a guy like Merlin or Jake, who's looking at solving a problem, for them to be able to directly partner and work with a non-US company, wherever they might be. And so that's what I think is really exciting most recently is partly space is the perfect place to steer that ship to do things differently.
Thank you. Jack, from your end, with the companies that you work with, obviously there's more and more companies coming and they're looking at different opportunities. What are you seeing that the companies you're working with are most interested in going after?
So particularly with respect to, well, I guess it's not particular, both US and foreign companies. The biggest struggle that they have early on is fundraising, right? It's not like Silicon Valley tech companies where it's much easier to get fundraising, particularly because the road to an exit is much shorter for a tech company than a hardware company. Of course, some of the space companies are software companies as well. So, but that said, funding is a lot harder for space. So it's really great that we have government agencies that are really eager to partner with small businesses who are focused on emerging tech. So the SBIR and SITR programs are fantastic, as are other transaction authorities, including the NASA's OTA, which is called a Space Act Agreement, and of course the DoD OTAs. Those give you great opportunities to continue your R&D and get your products up to commercialization. Also, it lends you some credibility. The fact that you've been working with a government contract, it enables you to grow a little bit so that you can have more time to make partnerships with other commercial partners and grow your business.
Excellent, thanks. And what we've heard as well is that, the industry is growing so fast, and there are more and more space companies emerging all around the world every day, and no one government has the resources alone to try and support them through research grants and things like that. The U.S. being privileged to have significant resources, it's logical to want to figure out how to get involved in the U.S. market, which makes a lot of sense. Kind of going a little bit higher level again. This one being for Major Singleton. You talked a little bit about some partnerships that had been emerging with certain nations. Can you share a little bit about maybe some of the activity that's happening with certain partners and how that has and will continue to lead to opportunities for companies?
Yeah, I can highlight a couple examples. If you're a non-US company looking at what kind of opportunities could I have to reach with, US Defense, US Space Force as a space company, there's a couple of different paths we can take. One is, again, as the customer trying to solve a capability need for our operators, I can work directly with you through a variety of contracts or agreements. DIU would be a perfect example of that. Another approach that we can take is that we can do government to government collaboration that we have authority to do, set up an agreement that allows us some additional kind of legal provisions to contract and work with companies. A good example of that is in 2020, I was working under exchange for the UK for a couple of years within their Defense Science and Technology Lab space program. And then what we did is we set up a cooperative program between the US and the UK, where we were able to jointly, through UK procurement authorities, fund contracts going to 10 different companies in 4 countries. So what that allowed us to do from a US space, capability customer perspective is work directly with an ally or partner, friendly nation, to collaborate and contract with space companies in the international marketplace. And when we did that, we engaged and worked with companies from about 30 countries. We awarded, again, 10 contracts. And as a follow-up to that, we worked with DIU for some, follow-on work within the US. The UK, through their Defense and Security Accelerator, also awarded some follow-up phase 2 awards to some of those companies. Again, that was with US and UK funding to do that. So cooperation there is one path that we're really interested in, is because we're not only interested in space capability in that international market just because it's exciting, it's cool, but because it solves a real threat or challenge that we're facing when it comes to national defense or security. But those challenges or those problems are not unique to us, and they are shared with partners, allies, friendly nations, again, around the world. So we are very interested in working government to government in cooperation there, and shifting that cooperation to a focus on the marketplace. And we realize that the U.S., has a desire to work with our industry to solve the problems, but in any country around the world, they have the same kind of priorities. And we want to not only solve problems for security, but we also want to invest in our industry for prosperity. And so we want to do that together and, reach and access companies in all of our kind of different markets. So there's one great example. We've also had some less formal cooperation, not directly in agreements, but collaborating on accelerator programs throughout the world. We do have similar international agreements where we've worked with industry with respect to responsive space capabilities. We have an MOU in place with over a dozen countries in that space, in launch and looking at secondary payloads and things like that, and doing those things together. So just kind of summarizing real quickly, government to government cooperation is something that we do to work with partners to reach companies around the world as well.
Excellent, thanks. So on that note, if one of these companies that's participating today was interested in finding out if there was any structured partnership already in place between the U.S. and their country, what would be a way that they would be able to investigate that? Is that something that they could ask you about, or what would you recommend?
Absolutely. Happy for anyone to reach out to me with those questions. Space Systems Command has an international affairs office that's based in LA, and they work cooperatively with countries and governments around the world, around the year, constantly looking for opportunities to collaborate. All those discussions are going to have an element of, what are industry doing in your market, and, what kind of opportunities might be there. And so we can share information about current agreements that are in place, potentially between the U.S. and, a country wherever you might be sitting right now.
And on that note, we've observed that, particularly in smaller countries, the existing space startups that are there already tend to have pretty strong relationships with their federal governments. If there wasn't necessarily a strong partnership in place, and they wanted to, facilitate or encourage their governments to pursue opportunities to partner on some of the ways that you described earlier, is there a pathway to do that as well? Would that be the same pathway?
Yeah, I'd agree that would be the same pathway for the Space Force through our Space Systems Command International Affairs Office. And we're absolutely looking for new partnerships, less traditional partnerships. Maybe in the Army, Navy, land, Air Force side, we haven't done a lot with a particular country. But again, two things are changing: our attention on space and the marketplace. So we recognize that for the first time in history, a lot of the new investors in space are happening coming from outside the U.S., and a lot of those deals are going to non-U.S. companies. Now we see SpaceX, on the headlines with Starlink and things like that. But what's really interesting is what Seraphim Capital highlighted a couple years ago as the close to 200 companies in over 30 countries around the world that were actively raising capital for new satellite constellations. So that's where the real story is. And those are coming out of, again, more than 30 countries. We're interested in having those conversations with everyone and anywhere to think about how we can, again, work collaboratively together, partner with companies to produce more solutions for not only shared security, but shared prosperity.
Well, thank you. So we're thrilled to have Major Ryan on, so we could kind of dig into one of these agencies, these programs specifically, in this case, DIU, to see how opportunities are facilitated directly with one of these government agencies. So I'd love to turn it over to you, Major Ryan, if you could share with us a little bit more about DIU, about how you apply and work with DIU, and maybe dig a little bit deeper into your focus areas.
Yeah, before I answer that, I just wanted to point out something that maybe might have been missed that Major Singleton was alluding to, or I just want to make that connection as well, that all of those opportunities that he's talking about, and it's a really exciting time for all of these space companies, is because of a lot of that commercial development that is happening already. So all of this growth, a lot of that business is commercial to commercial, and that's a huge thing. So it's all of these companies collaboratively working together. It is not just solely, the U.S. government or any international government kind of pushing this. And so to go along with that, that kind of was how DIU was established, and Jake provided an excellent overview of Ash Carter and the start of that time, where we use what are called we use what is called an other transaction authority, and our process is called a commercial solutions opening. So another transaction authority is open to all international, not all international countries, but most international countries to compete. There's no exclusion for foreign-owned or operated companies to be working with the U.S. on an other transaction authority. And what we do is we open up a problem. This is a capability gap that we would like to solve as a community within the space portfolio. And around 2016, we were looking at tactical launch, and we're looking at small launch companies. And getting capability into orbit is the objective of that. How we do it is not something that we wanted to dictate. So we work on what is called just an area of interest, and we publish that to our website for 2 weeks typically. And you can find all of these commercial solutions openings on our website at diu.mil. And when the commercial solutions opening, it's just going to describe the capability gap that we're trying to solve. And in order to apply to potentially help solve that problem, and this can once again be an international company, a U.S. owned company, owned by foreign ownership as well as domestic. It could be a mix, anything. It's just a 15-slide submission. So what we're trying to get an understanding of is how mature is your company, how capable are you at solving the problem, and what are you looking at technology-wise to meet that capability gap for us. And so when it's open for 2 weeks, we review the solutions. And for specifically the launch one, we received a number of different solutions. So we had traditional launch, we had airborne launch, and we had innovative companies that were looking at spinning up payloads and taking care of that first stage of launch by throwing the object into space. So I think that by just following the DIU website and tracking what commercial solutions openings we post, that would be the start of the process for working with DIU. Additionally, from that, we have an international engagements office as well at DIU. You would be able to contact them through diu.mil, and that would typically be government to government more so than a commercial company to DIU. But we have relationships with all of the Five Eyes partners and a number of our allies, as well as a number of the NATO countries. And that is just to get an understanding of the technological needs that are specific to each of those countries, where each country has an edge, what industries they're supporting. For example, the robotics industry was heavily supported by Japan, and we would like to collaborate with them on a number of different projects down the line.
Excellent. Thank you. Just another area that pops up that can be a challenge is oftentimes, as Jack was mentioning earlier, consider opportunities, assuming that an international company is able to get stood up in the United States in a way that they could apply for those, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Assuming that they can do that, the need for a user internally within the federal government can be a challenge. It's a challenge for domestic companies to identify those folks, much less the challenge that an international company would face. And so I just wanted to mention that there are some additional programs like Q Station that I mentioned earlier that can help facilitate some of that. And so, Kelly, if you wouldn't mind, I know probably a lot of the companies that are participating are former Hyperspace participants, but if you wouldn't mind mentioning a little bit about Hyperspace. We also have another sister organization in Colorado Springs called Catalyst Campus that has the Catalyst Accelerator. And I know, Kelly, you guys work pretty closely with them as well. If you wouldn't mind talking about both of those programs, how they lead to problem sets that they can use as an opportunity to get in front of government people. And then also, of course, how that process also can lead to introductions internally for the potential for future projects or research grants as a foreign company establishes itself in the U.S.
Sure. Yeah. So Hyperspace Challenge is a space tech accelerator. We're funded through the Space Force and through AFRL. And what we do is we look for those problem sets within the DoD, and we use those problem sets to work with the small businesses. So we find the problem set, and then we submit a press release basically, and we open up applications to small businesses who have innovative technology or creative solutions to those problems. And so basically acting as kind of a scout for the government. And then once we've chosen our cohort, we will, create, an experience for them that has education. How do we work with the government? Who do we look for? What kind of problems do they have? Some customer discovery in there. And then we also do an event, which we did our last one with Space RCO. And so we called it a partnership accelerator. And our main goal there was to build these relationships with the people that that they would need, everybody that they would need in order to be successful in space and government contracting. And so just have these events with, all the different organizations. We had SSC there, we had Space RCO, we had AFRL, we had people from a lot of different organizations.
If you wouldn't mind, everybody, I probably should have done this at the beginning, but this group of folks might be the group that less understands the acronyms of the various agencies. So if you
I'm
wouldn't
sorry, I
heard of them saying the full. So RCO.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reminding me. Space RCO stands for Space Rapid Capabilities Office, and then Space Systems Command. And AFRL is the research lab for the Air Force. Thank you very much. I always forget. But anyway, so we try to get as many different organizations, and then we also have the subject matter experts there, and other people as well. And Catalyst does kind of a similar program. Ours is pretty short, relatively. speaking. So Catalyst is very similar. They choose a problem set for the year and then build their programming around that. And then it's a 3-month long program. So.
Thank you. And I think one of the big opportunities there is these programs, they all revolve around a problem set. They lead up to, potential for prize money, even, a pathway potentially for contracts with the government, which is a fantastic opportunity. But a big change recently has been that their problem sets were all coming from the Air Force Research Lab. And you can only have so many problem sets on an ongoing basis for multiple accelerators. And that's really opened the door for partnerships with other federal agencies. So, Kelly invited me to a meeting the other day with a NASA representative. And in the future, there could potentially be a NASA problem set for Hyperspace Challenge. So it's not even about AFRL only at this point anymore. It's a great way to connect to other agencies that have opportunities that you might be looking for. Lastly, on our end, I'll just talk a couple seconds more about our cohort. It's the application process opens up in October of every year, October, November. We select 5 companies, and each company, and I'll use an international company as an example. An international company would benefit from hours from space regulatory attorney. Our partner is Aegis Law Firm to help them figure out how to navigate to set up in the United States, what entity, how to use license agreements to avoid your U.S. subsidiary running off with your company, with your IP. All of those challenges that Jack's going to get into here in just a second. We provide a patent attorney. We provide marketing and PR assistance. Our program is a year-long kind of complement to the accelerator programs to allow companies to get a lot of costly business services that they otherwise wouldn't have in-house or afford to help propel them forward. So you're welcome to reach out to me. Our website's qstation.tech. My email is randy@nmtradealliance.org, and happy to chat with anybody about those programs. But to make sure we have plenty of time to talk to Jack, which is I'm sure where a lot of these questions will end up coming to here in the Q&A session. So Jack, what actually has to happen? Let's say we have an international company that knows they have a big opportunity in the U.S. market, that want to do business with the DoD. They're sitting there in their home country right now. They have done nothing. They haven't established an entity yet. They don't have an understanding necessarily of the regulatory environment. What do we need to know?
Fantastic question. There's a lot to cover there. We obviously have a short amount of time, so I'll go as fast as I can. Before I get started, though, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to an event that's coming up in March, which is at Q Station, which is the Space Regulatory Boot Camp. It's 3 days of, one of those days, me talking about export controls all day. And then we've got somebody talking about government contracting all day. And I forgot what the third day is. But we've got 3 days of excellent education about these regulatory issues. And it will be at Q Station where Randy's at right now. So yeah, please check that out. So foreign company wants to come to the US, wants to engage with the US government. So first, just talking about SBIRs and sitters, that's usually the place where we start. We've got a few things that we have to do. First, we have to have more than 50% US ownership. You have to have US operations, and the way this is defined is that you have to either have a place of business located in the US, which operates primarily within the US, or which makes significant contribution to the US economy through payment of taxes, et cetera. Usually the way we solve that problem is just setting up a US entity. When it comes to that US ownership, with more than 50% ownership, people really freak out. European company wants to set up an American company to do business with the US government. And they're like, we have to give 50% of our company away? I say, well, you don't have to give 50% of your European company away. You have to create an entity in the US and give more than 50% of that company away to someone. That said, when you do that, there are a number of ways that you can protect yourselves. You can protect the intellectual property that you've already got, the IP that's created within that entity. Of course, you can license it back to your other entity. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. So there's lots of ways you can maintain your technology and hold on to it. and you're not going to lose your shirt because you're giving away more than half your company to some yank you just met yesterday. So there's a way to handle that. Got to be a small business, which means less, no more than 500 employees, which I'm sure isn't a problem for you guys. The work has to be performed by your company up to certain thresholds. So if you're in a phase 1 SBIR, it's like, I think it's 2/3 or more has to be done by your company. You can sub out the rest. If you're in a phase 2, it's at least a half of the work has to be done by you. When you get into sitters, it's a little bit different because you're going to be working with a research institution. Whether it's phase 1 or phase 2, your company has to be doing at least 40%, and then the research institution you're partnered with has to be doing at least 30%. So that adds up to 70. There's another 30% floating out there that you could sub out, I suppose. So SBIRs, there's a way to do it, and it seems really daunting for a lot of companies that are coming to the US to get involved in that, but we've done it with a lot of companies, and there's a clear path forward to getting it done. And lots of companies have come to the US and successfully engaged in SBIR and sitter programs. So that's kind of the short answer for SBIRs and sitters. When it comes to OTAs, it's a lot more open-ended because OTAs don't necessarily have those rules. Sometimes the government agency that's putting out another transaction authority type of arrangement, sometimes they impose some of the same rules from SBIRs and sitters, but sometimes they don't. Aside from SBIRs and sitters and then other transaction authorities, you also have like traditional contracting, which is very burdensome. You end up under this regulatory scheme called, which is regulated by the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and then all of these supplemental regulations depending on the department. So if you're dealing with the DoD, you've got the DFARS, which is the defense supplement to the Federal Acquisition Regulations. If you're dealing with NASA, you've got the NASA supplement. And then these are all, these are regulations that regulate that agency and how they contract with you. But it's quite complicated. So small businesses tend to stay away from FAR type contracting, and they tend to try to work with SBIRs, sitters, and OTAs. So that's a very short answer to a very big question. If you don't mind, I will now shift my focus to export controls. This is one of the bigger challenges for folks. We have tried to create the IKEA flat pack of an export compliance program, simply because not everybody needs their artisanal furniture in their startup, right? You don't need something super complicated. We've tried to streamline this process as much as we can after we've done it with so many companies. Export controls is going to be very important for you, and it's not something you should wait till the last minute to do. If you're getting involved in US government contracting and you're in the space industry, that means you're in either ITAR world or EAR world. You're in one of these two buckets that is export controlled. Your physical stuff that you are making is going to be controlled, meaning you can't send it out of the country, probably, without a license. Or your stuff is probably going to be controlled. The information related to your stuff is going to be controlled. So this might be information that explains like how you build your stuff. So technical drawings, for example, you're going to need to keep them secure and make sure that foreign people can't access them. What makes this really tricky is that if you are foreign founders in a US company, then the question is, can your company share stuff with you? This was the big problem with Momentous. If you guys ever read the headlines about Momentous, they became one of our clients, and we helped them with their export compliance program after they had all the issues with their SPAC. But one of the issues that was alleged in some of the SEC lawsuits was that the company hadn't disclosed that their founder couldn't have access to their technology because he was a Russian citizen. Obviously, you don't want a situation where you can't have access to the technology that you are paying to develop. That would really stink. So what we need to do is we need to figure out, how is your stuff controlled? Is it controlled under the ITAR or is it controlled under the EAR? If it's controlled under the EAR, It's not necessarily 100% that you're going to need a license to access it. So we would walk through an analysis to find out whether you even need a license in the first place. You probably do if you're in the space industry. But under the EAR, it's also more likely that you might have some licensing exceptions. And we can do an analysis to determine whether we are accepted from this rule that says you have to have a license from the government to see your own stuff. Then, if we can't find an exception, then we're going to just apply for license, and we're going to ask the government for permission for you to look at your own stuff. And it's likely, depending on where you're from, that the government will grant those licenses, especially if it's the stuff that you are developing. Let's see. So if you're a foreign founder and you're coming to the US, of course, the easiest solution for you from an export control standpoint, but not necessarily easy from an immigration standpoint, is that the best solution is for you to actually try to get a green card. If you can get a green card, then you are a US person, and we treat you just like any other American citizen. One small caveat to that, if you get down the road a bit and you end up getting a secret or top secret or other kind of classified contract, what I just said isn't necessarily true. You're not necessarily going to be treated like an American citizen just because you have a green card. But from an export control perspective, if you are a green card holder, then you're going to be treated like an American, and you don't have to worry so much about the licensing for you to see your stuff. All right, now if we figure out all of the problems with respect to foreign founders, you still have to protect your stuff. When you get into a contract with the DoD, very often they're going to give you this form called a DD 2345. And that form is going to ask you, hey, how's your stuff controlled? Are you registered with the Director of Defense Trade Controls, which administers the ITAR? They're going to ask you some questions about your export compliance and how you're handling that. And you don't want to, on the day that that is due, call me up and say, hey, Jack, can you help classify our stuff? Because I can't necessarily do it in one day. So you really want to get on that kind of early. And we want to put some processes in place. We like to put procedures in place that are very simple, that tell everyone in your company within a few short pages, hey, if this event occurs, fill out this form and send it to Jack. If this other event occurs, fill out this form and send it to Jack. And I can review those forms. I can let you know whether you can do the thing that you want to do or not. Some of those things are like allowing a foreign person to visit your facility to look at your stuff. Or maybe you want to travel internationally and you want to access your SharePoint data while you're traveling internationally. That might be an export of your stuff when you do that. You might actually want to send drawings to somebody in another country because you want them to make some widget for you. That could be an export, and that might potentially be a violation of the rules. So anytime you want to do one of these things, you might need to ask a compliance expert who can help you know whether you can do it or not. We've actually set up, essentially we took IT help desk software and we set it up as a service desk for our clients with really robust forms that they can use to submit these requests to us so that we can knock them out really fast, really efficiently, and save you guys a lot of money to do it. So that's kind of the long or short of it for export controls on the US side. One other thing you're going to have to think about is that your foreign company also has to worry about export controls. US export controls is a little weird in that the US government has extraterritorial jurisdiction. This means that if you got an ITAR controlled thing and it leaves the US and goes to your country, let's say that I ship something to you in Germany and you've got it there in Germany, and then you want to ship it to somebody in Sweden, you have to ask the US government for permission before you can re-export it from Germany to Sweden. Also, if you are in Germany and you want to hand it over to some other company within Germany, that would potentially be a retransfer that requires you to get a license from the US government. So once something's left the United States, the US government still has control over it. So your foreign policies and procedures need to be married to your US policies and procedures, or at least have some kind of understanding of each other so that your foreign company isn't violating US law. Oh, and just one last thing I'll add in there. In addition to re-exports and retransfers that I just talked about, when your foreign company uses US origin technology to build a thing, that thing that you have built might be considered controlled under US export control rules. And there's something called the foreign direct product rule. Also, if you have, like, let's say, a Qualcomm chip that goes into the thing that you're manufacturing in Germany, that Qualcomm chip came from the United States. As a result of the value that's been added by US parts going into your thing, now your thing might be controlled by either the ITAR or the EAR. So this is all stuff you need to take very seriously. You need to think about it very early on, really at the design stage when you're designing your stuff, because you might even want to think about designing around certain classifications. So I think I can end there unless anybody has any detailed questions they want to ask me.
Well, we'll transition into the final Q&A. Thanks, Jack. It wasn't meant to scare you, but it was also kind of meant to scare you a little bit, because these are very important things, and we do have experience in watching companies approach this the wrong way, and actually have to spend a considerable amount of time dissolving and reestablishing things to do it the right way. So this is one of those areas where you got to do it right from the very beginning.
And Randy, let me just add, it should be scary, but it shouldn't be overwhelming, because we know how to handle it. So if you got somebody who knows how to handle it for you, you can get it done, and it can be not necessarily a very painful process.
Exactly. And the point of today's conversation is to let you know that these resources do exist. There's one area where we didn't cover. Obviously, Jack probably could have done a 4-hour segment just himself. But one area that he mentioned, which maybe we could do on a future call, but there are some resources that cover, is the immigration side. And we have another partner, the Association of Commercial Space Professionals, which actually was born out of the partnership that we have with Aegis and the Space Regulatory Boot Camp and some of that work. And they actually just did a webinar on this. And so you can go and check that out if you want. I already spoke with them. Bryce Kennedy is the head of that organization, and he's expecting you to reach out either at info@acsp.space, or you could go directly to their website, acsp.space, and he'll be happy to provide you a recording of that webinar talking about immigration-related issues for foreign space companies. And also, of course, that would lead to other contacts for you directly with immigration attorneys, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over. Well, I want to thank all of our speakers. This was amazing. I'm actually shocked that we covered as much stuff as we did in really half an hour. But I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to lead a Q&A session.
Sure. So I think, a lot of these questions may have already been covered, but let me just go ahead and ask one. As a U.S. company, one of the major obstacles is finding technical workers in a tight labor market. What programs and strategies can I leverage to contract international labor? Many of the experts in my field are in Japan or Latin America. And then there's a clarification that says, looking for funding opportunities where I'm not restricted from spending awards monies on non-domestic contracts.
We'll take the first one, just because I think this is where foreign companies have a great opportunity, in that you get to choose where you want to be in the United States. And there are certain locations that are more organized and have more resources available to support in those endeavors. So I'll just use our region as an example. We call kind of this New Mexico, Colorado region, Space Valley. As we mentioned, we have sister organization in Colorado Springs. We have close relationships with local and state government, with their workforce training programs, with their community colleges, with their universities. Many of the federal folks that we have on today's call also have fantastic partnerships with universities where you can source talent. So at that point, it's really about the community. Which communities are you integrating yourself into? And in doing so, you open up a lot of these business resources that exist there, and in many cases specific to the space sector, depending on what region and the amount of activity that's happening that's related to space. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to that? Also, affiliations with professional organizations like ACSP that we talked about earlier. That's a great way to get integrated into the industry and start networking in the United States. And then could you repeat the second half, Kelly? Because I think that one was different than.
Sure. There was a second part saying, looking for funding opportunities where I'm not restricted from spending awards, monies on non-domestic contracts.
I think that's leading to the question of if you meet the eligibility requirements for a U.S. contract, are there restrictions on subcontracts to go to performance happening or workers in another country, for example, like Japan or Latin America?
Might be a Jack question.
I was reading somebody else's question and I missed it. I'm sorry. Can you ask it again?
Jake, go ahead. You say it next.
So they were asking if they're a U.S. company navigating around restrictions for subcontracting or labor from professionals that might be in Japan or Latin America.
And so is the question related to SBIRs in particular, or is it just more generally related to like labor law? Is the question in the Q&A where?
So it was the actual question was, well, it was just a clarification question. Looking for funding opportunities where I'm not restricted from spending awards, monies on non-domestic contracts. So
from the standpoint of SBIRs and sitters, I would just add that if these aren't your employees, then typically if you're going to be working with somebody who's in a foreign country, you're going to be working through some sort of employer organization. You probably, like, for example, there's a company called ADP, which is really popular. And what they do is they act as a employer of record in that foreign country, because it's really hard for you to understand the labor laws of a foreign country and actually employ somebody and pay taxes in that foreign country. So you work through a company called ADP. And then you have this arrangement where these employees are seconded to you. That's fancy legal speak for they're basically loaned to you. So it can get a little tricky. I want to be a little bit careful how much I answer this question because I'm getting a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. We do work with another law firm that handles exclusively employment law in all 50 states, and they can handle international stuff as well. And I can share a link to my favorite person over there in the chat, and he can get a lot more specific about the labor law aspects of this. All that said,
outside of the labor law, Jack, in terms of subcontracting, if you had a U.S. government contract, is it allowable? Where are those opportunities? What are the troubles?
So it's a good question as to whether this person would be considered an employee or a subcontractor if they are in this kind of relationship. And right off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to it. If they're an employee of yours, despite the fact that they're in another country and paid through another organization, it's possible that they're still considered an employee. I'm not sure for SBIR purposes. If they're considered an employee, you don't need to worry about it. If they're considered an independent contractor, then you need to worry about it because there's only a certain percentage threshold that you can subcontract out. So I'd actually be interested in researching that. I don't think that the SBIR rules are going to be very clear about that particular issue. We would have to make the argument that we would have to look at other areas of labor law essentially to paper up our argument that this person is in fact an employee and not an independent contractor, and then hope that the Small Business Administration doesn't see things differently. I do think that you could get an advisory opinion though from the Small Business Administration on that point if we needed to.
And on a general federal procurement, Jack, let's just say they bid and they won a contract. Where does kind of made in USA restrictions come into the picture?
Yeah, it depends on the contract, but you're going to see those a lot. You're definitely going to see a lot of made in the USA rules, and you're going to see rules related to supply chain where you're sourcing your stuff. If you're building a spacecraft for the U.S. government, you don't want to have a whole bunch of parts from Huawei in it. It's going to get you in trouble. So you're going to need to think about your supply chain a lot, and to the extent that you can develop and build things in the United States, you're going to want to do that. And it's going to be dependent on what your contract actually says.
Okay, with that, we're going to have to wrap it up, guys. It's now 11 o'clock. So wonderful panel. Thank you all so much. You guys have so much great information to share, and I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface here with some of these topics. But I did provide the contact information in the chat for all of these people. They are saying that you are welcome to contact them. So thanks again to everybody. Our next event will be 2 weeks from now. And I'm not sure what the date is. I'm sorry, I didn't look it up ahead of time. But it will be in an entrepreneur's guide to space investing. And so we are going to have Marlon Spike on. This is a repeat guest, so glad to have them back. We'll also have somebody from Lockheed Martin Ventures, and hoping to get somebody from New Mexico as well, a venture studio. So learning about the different kinds of venture capital investment options there are, and trying to figure out which one might be right for you. So like and subscribe on YouTube to get the notices. Also follow, make sure you open those emails from Hyperspace Challenge, because if you don't, they go to spam and you won't know about our next event. And you need to keep on top of this. We're trying to make sure that we have all of the topics that you need in order to be successful in space. So thanks again, guys, and hope to see you guys around sometime soon. And we'll see all the audience next week, or next, whenever it is. Okay, talk to you later. Bye-bye.